Good evening, everyone. It is Tuesday, December 22nd, and tonight we are finishing up The Velveteen Rabbit. It seems very strange to be finishing a book so soon after I started it, and as I mentioned last night, this book is a heck of a lot shorter than I remember it being. I don't really have much to say. I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. Tomorrow is a personal holiday that I've only just realized this year is actually a personal holiday. But I've been doing this for years. It was never like an intentional thing. I really like to keep the day before Christmas Eve free so that I can bake and cook and do all kinds of stuff. And so being sick last week really put me out because I really try and have like all of my laundry, all of my cleaning, everything done. I'm not quite done, but I can see the finish line. So I still have some things to do tonight, and I have some things to do tomorrow morning. But this is a special night. I feel a lot calmer than I've felt in quite some time, which is very nice. And I think I don't know. I certainly hope that. I certainly hope that you feel similar. Although, having said that, I think it is the virtue of not having children that I have the luxury of not being of being calm right now, because I know how much work it is for parents to really make Christmas for their children, especially this year. I have absolutely no frame of reference, to be perfectly honest with you. So, as someone who grew up with really wonderful Christmas memories, holiday memories, all of that, I'm really grateful to those of you who are watching who are parents who are working to, even if you don't celebrate Christmas at all, especially if you don't celebrate Christmas, because, if you don't celebrate Christmas, you're kind of, I think it would be very difficult. This is why I'm doing this, because over the years, I really stopped celebrating Christmas in any meaningful way. Gosh, by the time I was, definitely in my early 20s. And doing this so-called Atheist Advent, which of course is so named because it's an atheist who's doing Advent, as I've mentioned on the first night, this is my way of laying claim to a treasured family tradition from childhood. And I think this is the first year I've really come to understand what it means to observe Christmas in the way that I observe it, although not in a religious way, but in a way that pays homage to being a child. If you were fortunate enough to have good memories from childhood, perhaps you don't. And if you don't, I certainly hope that having these children's stories read to you is at least helping to infuse some sense of childhood wonder into your current life. Anyway, that's my spiel. Shall we begin? Also, I just noticed I started with the fake glasses. Don't worry, it won't be a trend. So, to pick up where we left off last night, in fact, I will actually, so we came to know, the Velveteen Rabbit and the Skin Horse, and so I will start the paragraph before where I was intending to start. So this is where I ended last night. Weeks passed, and the little rabbit grew very old and shabby, but the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that he loved all his whiskers off, and the pink lining to his ears turned gray, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape, and he scarcely looked like a rabbit anymore, except to the boy. To him, he was always beautiful, and that was all that the little rabbit cared about. He didn't mind how he looked to other people, because the nursery magic had made him real. And when you are real, shabbiness doesn't matter. And then, one day, the boy was ill. His face grew very flushed, and he talked in his sleep, and his little body was so hot that it burned the rabbit when he held him close. Strange people came and went in the nursery. A light burned all night, and through it all, the little Velveteen Rabbit lay there, hidden from sight under the bedclothes. And he never stirred, for he was afraid that if they found him, someone might take him away. And he knew that the boy needed him. It was a long, weary time, for the boy was too ill to play, and the little rabbit found it rather dull with nothing to do all day long. But he snuggled down patiently and looked forward to the time when the boy should be well again, and they would go out in the garden among the flowers and the butterflies and play splendid games in the raspberry thicket like they used to. All sorts of delightful things he planned, and while the boy lay half asleep, he crept up close to the pillow and whispered them in his ear. And presently the fever turned, and the boy got better. He was able to sit up in bed and look at picture books, and while the little rabbit cuddled close at his side. And one day they let him get up and dress. It was a bright, sunny morning, and the windows stood wide open. They had carried the boy out onto the balcony wrapped in a shawl, and the little rabbit lay tangled up among the bedclothes, thinking. The boy was going to the seaside tomorrow. Everything was arranged, and now it only remained to carry out the doctor's orders. They talked about it all, while the little rabbit lay under the bedclothes with just his head peeping out, and listened. The room was to be disinfected, and all the books and toys that the boy had played with in bed must be burned. "Hurrah!" thought the little rabbit. "Tomorrow we shall go to the seaside!" For the boy had often talked of the seaside, and he wanted very much to see the big waves coming in and the tiny crabs and the sandcastles. Just then Nana caught sight of him. "How about this old bunny?" she asked. "That?" said the doctor. "Why, it's a mass of scarlet fever germs. Burn it at once." "What? Nonsense. Get him a new one. He mustn't have that any more." And so the little rabbit was put into a sack with the old picture books and a lot of rubbish, and carried out to the end of the garden behind the fowl house. That was a fine place to make a bonfire, only the gardener was too busy just then to attend to it. He had the potatoes to dig and the green peas to gather, but next morning he promised to come quite early and burn the whole lot. That night the boy slept in a different bedroom, and he had a new bunny to sleep with him. It was a splendid bunny, all white plush with real glass eyes. But the boy was too excited to care very much about it, for tomorrow he was going to the seaside. And that in itself was such a wonderful thing that he could think of nothing else. And while the boy was asleep, dreaming of the seaside, the little rabbit lay among the old picture books in the corner behind the fowl house, and he felt very lonely. The sack had been left untied, and so by wriggling a bit he was able to get his head through the opening and look out. He was shivering a little, for he had always been used to sleeping in a proper bed, and by this time his coat had worn so thin and threadbare from hugging that it was no longer any protection to him. Nearby he could see the thicket of raspberry canes growing tall and close like a tropical jungle, in whose shadow he had played with the boy on bygone mornings. He thought of those long sunlit hours in the garden, how happy they were, and a great sadness came over him. He seemed to see them all pass before him, each more beautiful than the other, the fairy huts in the flower bed, the quiet evenings in the wood when he lay in the bracken, and the little ants ran over his paws, the wonderful day when he first knew that he was real. He thought of the skin horse, so wise and gentle, and all that he had told him. Of what use was it to be loved and lose one's beauty and become real, if it all ended like this? And a tear, a real tear, trickled down his shabby velvet nose and fell to the ground. And then a strange thing happened. For where the tear had fallen, a flower grew out of the ground, a mysterious flower, not at all like any that grew in the garden. It had slender green leaves, the color of emeralds, and in the center of the leaves a blossom like a golden cup. It was so beautiful that the little rabbit forgot to cry, and just lay there watching it. And presently the blossom opened, and out of there stepped a fairy. She was quite the loveliest fairy in the whole world. Her dress was of pearl and dewdrops, and there were flowers round her neck and in her hair, and her face was like the most perfect flower of all. And she came close to the little rabbit and gathered him up in her arms and kissed him on his velveteen nose that was all damp from crying. "Little rabbit," she said, "don't you know who I am?" The rabbit looked up at her, and it seemed to him that he had seen her face before, but he couldn't think where. "I am the nursery magic fairy," she said. "I take care of all the playthings that the children have loved. When they are old and worn out, and the children don't need them anymore, then I come to take them away with me and turn them into real." "Wasn't I real before?" asked the little rabbit. "You were real to the boy," the fairy said, "because he loved you. Now you shall be real to everyone." And she held the little rabbit close in her arms and flew with him into the wood. It was light now, for the moon had risen. All the forest was beautiful, and the fronds of the bracken shone like frosted silver. In the open glade between the tree trunks, the wild rabbits danced with their shadows on the velvet grass. But when they saw the fairy, they all stopped dancing and stood round in a ring to stare at her. "I've brought you a new playfellow," the fairy said. "You must be very kind to him and teach him all he needs to know in Rabbitland, for he is going to live with you forever and ever." And she kissed the little rabbit again and put him down on the grass. "Run and play, little rabbit," she said. But the little rabbit sat quite still for a moment and never moved, for when he saw all the wild rabbits dancing around him, he suddenly remembered about his hind legs, and he didn't want them to see that he was made all in one piece. He did not know that when the fairy kissed him that last time, she had changed him altogether. And he might have sat there a long time, too shy to move, if just then something hadn't tickled his nose, and before he thought what he was doing, he lifted his hind toe to scratch it. And he found that he actually had hind legs. Instead of dingy velveteen, he had brown fur, soft and shiny. His ears twitched by themselves, and his whiskers were so long that they brushed the grass. He gave one leap, and the joy of using those hind legs was so great that he went springing about the turf on them, jumping sideways and whirling around as the others did, and he grew so excited that when at last he did stop to look for the fairy, she had gone. He was a real rabbit at last, at home with the other rabbits. Autumn passed, and winter, and in the spring, as the days grew warm and sunny, the boy went out to play in the wood behind the house. And while he was playing, 2 rabbits crept out from the bracken and peeped at him. One of them was brown all over, but the other had strange markings under his fur, as though long ago he had been spotted, and the spots still showed through. And about his little soft nose and his round black eyes there was something familiar, so that the boy thought to himself, "Why, he looks just like my old bunny that was lost when I had scarlet fever." But he never knew that it really was his own bunny, come back to look at the child who had first helped him to be real. And so, I brought a friend. I have had a friend sitting on my lap. This was my Velveteen Rabbit. So, this was my bear that I very imaginatively named Bear. And as you can see, his poor little nose. It's actually really funny. I actually don't remember what he looked like, but everything when he was all put together. But yeah, he lives in my front closet, and I still have my baby blankets. I actually don't even remember when they were given to me, but yeah. I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, I really don't think that the need for illogical external comfort, I don't think is a need that disappears when you become an adult. In fact, I would venture to say that it only increases with age. I think that's why this is such a lonely time. Christmas is such a lonely time. Specifically, I think more than any other holiday. Holidays are a lonely time, empirically speaking, especially for people who live alone, or perhaps don't have families for, maybe perhaps they've all gone, or perhaps something much worse. If you weren't fortunate enough to have a good childhood, perhaps it's lonely this time of year because you feel excluded. Uh, either because perhaps you're not fortunate enough to have a lot of friends, which is a terrible thing, or perhaps you're excluded because you feel somehow, perhaps not excluded by friends, but just excluded on a religious basis. I mean, let's face it. This is not me calling out any one religion, but this is to say that it's already such a divisive thing, and this idea that somehow you are incapable of celebrating Christmas if you don't, perhaps you don't believe in Jesus, you don't believe in the Savior, you don't believe that Christmas is a literal historical observance of the birth of Christ. So I think it's lonely because it makes us remember what it's like to be a kid. And as Irma Bombeck famously said, there is nothing sadder than waking up on Christmas morning and not being a child. And, it's so much work for those of you that have children that I think it becomes very difficult to actually stop and enjoy it. And it only becomes possible to enjoy it through memory rather than actually experiencing it. Or perhaps you're someone who wished to have children, but for whatever reason, through cruel circumstance, was unable to do so. I personally don't regret my decision not to have children. Although having said that, I think there's always a needling sense of what could have been. And while it is not an active thing that brings me grief, it is something that gives me pause, especially as all of my nieces and nephews are getting older, becoming adults, and kind of wondering where the hell I've been for the last 18 years or more. So I'm hoping that by turning to those parts of our childhood that are happy, it can provide a way to be less lonely and to make this holiday season a little bit less dark. A holiday season that is already dark without the help of a global pandemic. I really don't know where I'm going with all of this. All I can say is this year more than ever, it has made me understand what Christmas is. Perhaps not literally, but metaphorically. And will inform how I choose to observe it in the future. Rather than just saying, oh, I don't observe Christmas, I don't observe it in a religious way, blah, 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 blah. I no longer feel the need to qualify that statement. And I'm accordingly, and I have to tell you, I mean, the founder of the feast is my 96-year-old grandmother who gifted me this moonstone. And if you're tuning in, by the way, she's still very much living, and she called me today. But because she read to me as a child. And of course, celebrating Advent all through my childhood, which, of course, in church we would light that week's candle, and then we would have weekly readings, nightly readings, different devotionals from different portions of the Bible. Just the simple act of being read to is powerful, truly. And especially thinking about it and how much it's impacted my life, and it has given me the ability to spread to you something that is a very treasured part of my upbringing. So thank you for letting me go on this tear. We have 2 more nights. Don't worry, tomorrow's funny. As I've said a couple times, tomorrow is not necessarily it's not a kid-friendly one at all. There's no nudity or swearing or anything like that, but it's shall we say illusion shattering. But yeah, tomorrow night I will be reading Is There a Santa Claus? Which is from an old email forward that got passed along starting in 95, Christmas of 95. That was my freshman year of high school, and that's when I remember it from. And I read it to my nieces and nephews in the car on the way back home 2 years ago, and we were just screaming with laughter. It's so much fun. And then Christmas Eve, which is also Yola Bokaflo, Christmas Book Flood, the Icelandic tradition, I will be reading two remaining chapters from Irma Bombeck's The Family, the Ties That Bind and Gag, which I started this whole series with. It's not the only two chapters remaining, but it's my two favorites. And I will be performing Herman Beeftink's Frequency. Sadly, I will not be doing it live, not only because it's a multi-tracked piece, but I do have the option of playing one of the tracks live, but as it is past 10 in Chicago, I want to be respectful to my neighbors, and it's just not fair to be doing a piece that has a lot of high flute and piccolo and stuff in it. But thank you so much for joining me, and I will look forward to seeing you tomorrow night.